October 1962. The United States Strategic Air Command moves the American military to Defense Condition 2, one step away from nuclear war.
Each one of those bombers had a target.
In the U.S. and Moscow, accusations and denials.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over.
U.S. invasion forces are poised for a massive attack, while at sea, in the air, and on land, nuclear weapons are in the hands of captains and majors.
If called upon to use a weapon, we would have fulfilled our orders.
We're going to throw the Soviets out of there and, teach them this is our hemisphere. And we're going to do away with Castro once and for all.
The attention of the world is on the island nation of Cuba, where men, women, and children are mobilized to defend against imminent invasion. In the White House and the Kremlin, lack of sleep, lack of communication.
The question that was raised, who's in charge in the Soviet Union? That's when things really get dangerous.
At stake is the fate of the entire world. There is little doubt that this war, if it comes, will be nuclear.
There was panic. There's no two ways about it. People thought that this was a real thing.
I told my wife, I will not go to work today. I don't know what will be tomorrow. It's quite possible that tomorrow we will not be alive.
DEFCON 2, the highest state of U.S. military readiness, short of nuclear war.
I'm Tom Clancy. Most of you know me as a writer of fiction involving nuclear weapons and superpower confrontation. But for a few tense weeks in October 1962, it wasn't fiction at all. It was reality. In Washington, Moscow, Havana, and on the high seas. We've always known that the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world closer than it has ever been to nuclear war. But much of what really went on behind the scenes has been kept top secret until only very recently. Now, 40 years later, those who are on the front lines of the crisis, missile commanders, submarine captains, and undercover spies, now tell us that we were even closer to nuclear war than almost anyone thought. That nuclear launch capability on both sides depended upon the reliability of mid-rank officers, men who would not hesitate to fire those devastating weapons if ordered to do so. Worse yet, a global nuclear war could very easily have started by accident. It was touch and go for days when, for the first time in history, the United States went to DEFCON 2. I'm Tom Clancy, and this is DEFCON 2.
It's the height of the Cold War, and the leader of the Soviet Union, Premier Nikita Khrushchev, is contemplating his next critical move. He takes a walk with his defense minister, Marshal Malinovsky, on the shores of the Black Sea.
When the days are clear, you can see across the Black Sea the lines of the Turkish shore. And Malinovsky and Khrushchev, walking alongside, were discussing, and then suddenly Malinovsky said, "Well, Nikita, look there. It's Turkey. There are American missiles." And Khrushchev reacted, "We must think about it and do something."
Khrushchev can see more than Jupiter missiles in Turkey. He can see the Soviet Union's entire strategic position in mid-1962, and he does not like what he sees. He sees the U.S. and its NATO allies surrounding him with nuclear weapons. 15 Jupiter missiles being installed in Turkey, 30 more in Italy, 60 Thor missiles in Britain. But most threatening of all, he sees nearly 1,600 American strategic bombers and 200 intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can strike the Soviet Union from the U.S. In the Cold War balance, the Soviets have a significant disadvantage. General Anatoly Gribkov served on the Red Army General Staff in Moscow.
The United States had about 5,000 warheads, the Soviet Union 300, and of those only 2 or 3 dozen that could hit the United States. Unfortunately for Khrushchev, the Soviet Union was surrounded by military bases, American bases. But America was free of that encirclement.
But for Khrushchev, there is a bright spot: Fidel Castro's Cuba. A communist island in a sea of American power, Khrushchev's one small foothold in the Western Hemisphere. But Cuba was an ally that could be lost at any moment. The U.S. had been trying to overthrow Castro since 1961, first by small infiltrations, then, finally, in an invasion by Cuban exiles, trained, armed, and sponsored by the CIA. That mission at the Bay of Pigs failed badly.
The Bay of Pigs invasion of 1960 was the culmination of activities of the United States against the Cuban Revolution.
After Bay of Pigs invasion and its collapse, Moscow got a proof that there are real intervention plans supported, at least supported, by Washington.
Khrushchev's solution? Do with Cuba what the U.S. had done in Turkey. Put nuclear weapons right under the enemy's nose. The Soviet strategic position would improve practically overnight. With one bold stroke, Castro's Cuba would be protected from impending invasion, while Khrushchev's bargaining power and his prestige would be enhanced. At the Ministry of Defense in Moscow, General Gribkov takes a lead role in planning the top-secret operation.
There were no telephone conversations, no letters written, not even codes, nothing.
The operation is codenamed Anadir. It's the name of a cold Siberian city, a clever diversion from their actual tropical destination.
And it was decided to send a mission to Cuba to discuss this idea with Cubans.
Fidel didn't give us an immediate answer. He said, we need time to think.
When the offer to deploy these missiles was presented by the Soviets in May of 1962, Cuba felt obliged to accept the missiles in order to show solidarity towards socialist countries that were supporting Cuba in this very unequal battle against the U.S. administration.
On the third day, Fidel said, if it is necessary for the interests of the world revolution and the interests of the Soviet Union, then we agree.
With Castro's consent, Operation Anadir is on. It would be the largest seaborne operation in Soviet history. The Soviets have just 4 months to organize, transport, and install 60 nuclear missiles and 40,000 men on an island nearly 8,000 miles away. And it all has to be done in secret. To disguise their intentions, the Soviets decide to use cargo ships. At Soviet ports, 85 ships are prepared for departure. Together, they will transport 60 ballistic missiles, jet aircraft, and more than 40,000 men to an unknown destination. As part of the deception plan, some soldiers are issued Arctic clothing. Even the ship captains have no idea where they are headed.
Before we sailed, we were given 3 sealed packets numbered 1, 2, and 3. On the first was written, to be opened after leaving the territorial waters of the Soviet Union.
As the ships pass through the Bosphorus Straits in Turkey, the second envelope is opened. It contains the order to steam beyond the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Atlantic Ocean.
In the third packet was the order to go on to Havana, Cuba, and everything became clear.
Clear, but not easy. Temperatures below decks reach 110 to 115 degrees.
The situation was very difficult. There was not enough water. There were no bathrooms. We had to use buckets. But the worst part was the heat. We were almost dying from the heat and the stuffiness, but it was forbidden for us to go out on deck. There was a guard. They only opened the hatch at night, so men could go out on deck and get fresh air.
As the ships approach Caribbean waters, they are closely observed by American aircraft. The Americans have reason to be suspicious. Throughout 1961 and 62, the United States military has been developing contingency plans for a full-scale U.S. invasion of Cuba. Its codename, Opland 316. Flying as low as 200 feet, American Navy aircraft photographed the ship's mysterious cargo.
When we were 2 or 3 days from Cuba, we noticed the American reconnaissance aircraft above us. On the last day of our trip, an American helicopter was hovering above us, almost touching our mast.
The photographs from the Navy patrols are rushed to Washington, D.C. The film is received by an elite team of photo analysts at the secretive National Photographic Interpretation Center, or NPIC. Dino Brugioni was a lead analyst on the NPIC team.
During 1962, there was just one ship after another carrying supplies to Cuba, and we were looking at each one of them. When the Russian freighters came out of the Bosphorus, they were photographed in the Bosphorus. They were photographed again from our units in Sicily and Gibraltar. So we had all this photography coming in.
While Brugione and his colleagues cannot see the ship's cargo, they can make conclusions based on what is visible. The photographs show crates on the decks of the ships.
We had a good knowledge of the crates that the Soviets packed their aircraft in because we had been watching Egypt and Syria and others who were receiving Soviet aid. We could precisely measure the crate. In a sense, we would make like a little box and then see what would fit in them.
The Soviet ships unload at the port of Mariel in Cuba. U.S. surveillance photographs confirm the contents of the crates. Fighter jets, patrol boats, and trucks, all clearly arms for Cuba. But there is no photographic evidence of nuclear missiles. For the Soviets, their secret is safe. Leading one team of missile engineers is a young major, Mikhail Bernov.
We would unload at Mariel only at night. We had the missiles in a big hangar, and we would only transport them after 3 in the morning.
Moving at night keeps the missiles secret from the watchful eyes of American surveillance. Keeping the operation secret from Cuban civilians, however, proves a greater challenge. Jorge Risquet was a party secretary in the Cuban government.
We have to say that it was an open secret, a secret that millions of Cubans knew about. For example, there were cases where we would have to tear down a house in a small village to allow the big missile trucks to turn a corner.
It was difficult to maneuver a 30-meter-long missile on a truck. It's hard to corner in small villages where there may be a 90-degree turn with a telephone pole. We would have to cut down the pole to get through.
The Soviet soldiers wear civilian clothing and are not allowed to speak Russian. Once troops arrive at the designated sites, the living conditions remain difficult.
We didn't have housing. We had to build it ourselves. We didn't want to go to bed. We were scared of insects biting us.
Meanwhile, 75,000 feet above them, they are being watched. The American U-2 is a high-altitude spy plane, carrying cameras loaded with high-resolution film. It shoots enormous negatives of the ground from 14 miles high. The U-2 can see fine detail, small vehicles, men, tire tracks. But August 1962 is cloudy. For 3 crucial weeks, the U-2 overflights are put on hold. the assembly and concealment of the Soviet missile sites continues to go unobserved. August 29th, a U-2 spy plane is finally cleared for an overflight of Cuba. When the film from this run is analyzed by the NPIC, they discover the first signs of real trouble.
On an August the 28th mission over Cuba, we spot these objects. This particular pattern looks like a Star of David.
The photo analysts recognize this pattern from previous reconnaissance photography of Soviet weapon sites. There is no doubt these objects are what's known as SAMs, SA-2 surface-to-air missile sites. Problem number one, SA-2 SAMs are capable of shooting down U-2 aircraft. Problem number two, the fact that the Soviets installed these sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons indicates they are protecting something much larger. But for now, the nuclear missiles are too well hidden to be seen.
The missiles were covered in tents. They were 30 meters long, put into a ditch and covered so that from above you could only see tents.
As Major Richard Heiser takes off from Edwards Air Force Base in California on the next U-2 overflight of Cuba, the U.S.-Soviet situation stands at a crossroads. The Soviets are within days of making their nuclear missiles operational. The Americans know something dangerous is happening in Cuba, but aren't sure what it is. On Vieques Island, off the coast of Puerto Rico, Oplan 316 is rehearsed by American Marines in preparation for a full-scale invasion of Cuba. 7 a.m. As Heiser steers his U-2 into Cuban airspace, the Cold War is about to change dramatically. Major Richard Heiser returns from a 6-hour flight over Cuba